Hi everyone, welcome to Spotlight, brought to you by Kaitzak. In this series, we explore the impactful journeys of diasporans excelling within their community impact, professional achievement, as well as business innovation. From community builders transforming their local areas, to professionals and leaders excelling within their fields, to entrepreneurs driving business excellence, each episode delves into the lives of the individuals making strides. We uncover the challenges they've faced, the strategies that have led them to their success, all the while providing insights, blueprints for their journeys, and inspiration for all. So join us on our journey discovering those largely under-recognized heroes, making hugely positive impacts within their communities and on those people around them. In today's episode of Spotlight, we have the pleasure of interviewing Miss Claudia Cholakian, an Australian-born professional women's football player, among other things. She's played at Australia's highest league for Sydney Football Club, the most successful club in the A-League. She's currently a member of the Armenian national women's football team, who are looking to qualify for the upcoming UEFA Women's Euro. We get to talk to her about her inspirations, politics in sport, how she manages her confidence, and her experiences traveling to Armenia with her family for the first time to play at the highest level. She's eloquent and candid about her experiences, and as such acts as an inspiration for all young aspiring female football players. I just wanted to kick us off with basically your journey with football, with soccer.
Yeah.
You know, what was sort of your main influences growing up? And I know your family's quite sporty. Um, and yeah, how you sort of developed your love for the game, and yeah, maybe just take it from there.
Okay, well, I guess it all started when I think I was around 5 years old. That's when I started playing football, and it really came from my brother. So, my brother Brendan plays football as well, and he still does. But I remember as a kid, anything that he would do, I had to do. And it wasn't just football, like anything. So obviously because he played football, I was then like, Mum, Dad, I want to play football because obviously Brendan's doing it. I have to do it. So that's really how I got into it. And then obviously I really enjoyed it, and I was relatively good at it. So I kept going with it. And like you said, yeah, my family's been like always been very sporty. Like my dad played football. He was really good. My mum didn't play football, but she was very like athletic and really enjoyed things like gymnastics and athletics like track and field stuff. So I guess it was probably in my genes that I was sporty. But that's really where it all started when I was 5 years old, and I've been playing, God, in NPL, which is I guess like tier two of Australia level, for I think, oh God, I don't want to say 20 years, but it probably, no, it's not 20 years. It's 15 years. I sound really old now. But a very, very long time, really, since I was like 11.
Right.
So
So yeah.
yeah, it's and then obviously as that's kind of happened and I've gone through and grown up, I've had different experiences in football. Like played, I was with Sydney FC for a bit, and then obviously joined the Armenian national team. So yeah,
Yeah.
haven't really stopped since I started when I was 5.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Awesome. Awesome. Well, maybe we can talk about. You played for Manly, is that right? Is that where you
Yeah.
started?
No. I started, so I guess the youngest one I can remember was like Chatswood Rangers, which is literally just like my local football team. So I was there when I was really young and I was playing with boys because at that point there was no girls team. But I love
Right.
that because smashing boys is fun. um, so I was doing that until I was 11, and that was the first time I had the chance to actually play in a girls team, and in a rep team. So mum and dad was like, okay, like we'll take you, give it a go. So that's when I joined Koalas, which is now Spirit FC.
Right.
So I played there for a little bit. Then I went to Northern Tigers, and then I went to Manly probably when I was 17, and then I was there for like 7, 8 years. So quite a like that was like pretty much the main part of when I was playing football, and really developed as a player. So yeah, I was there for quite a while, and then I moved to Sydney Olympic. And then that kind of crossed over with my time at Sydney FC, and
Yep.
then back to Northern Tigers 1 year, and now I'm at Gladesville Ravens. So I've moved
Yeah.
around a little bit, but yeah, they've all been really great, and I've had a different challenge and a different experience at each of those clubs, which I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, so I'm pretty keen to hear about your sort of elevation into top tier Australia soccer and what that experience was like. And I also, yeah, more like I guess a personal question is what sort of your decision making process. I know there's a lot of factors in like switching teams, and
Yeah.
some you might not want to talk about. Some might be quite simple. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, maybe you could sort of talk us through that, like first, like sort of your thinking process and what you sort of go through when you have to change clubs. It's a whole new group, and you probably know some of the coaches and stuff already. But
Yeah.
what's that like? Yeah.
It's actually a really good question. I guess obviously the younger age groups, it's a bit different. It's you're like, it depends on like logistics, like mum and dad's dropping their training and stuff like that. So I guess that's slightly different. But I guess where it really started, my like first memory of having to make a big decision around changing clubs was Manly, because obviously I was there for such a long time. Really enjoyed being there. I think my decision was like, we'd just won the league. Which is something that I'd been working towards like the whole time I've been there. Like I started in reserve grade. The next step was then play first grade, play regularly, and then win the league. So I guess like I'd achieved everything that I wanted to achieve at Manly. And I felt when I was going into that next season, I was like, oh, I'm not that excited, because I'm like, what's the next challenge? And I didn't really know what that looked like at Manly. So that's when I was like, oh, I think it might be time to go to a different club, to try something new, to have a new challenge, because I'd had that full experience at Manly. So
Yep.
definitely not like a thing where it was like, I'm not happy there anymore. So that's why I went to Olympic, because I was like, there's a lot of players there who I'd been playing with at Sydney FC. So I was like, oh, that's a great kind of opportunity to play with them more regularly. So moved to Sydney Olympic. The first season it was COVID, so it was half a season, and I was literally injured for the whole first half. So it was pretty much non-existent.
Right.
But the second season was really great. It was a little hard because one week would have all the players there, which was fantastic. Would like smash teams, and it was like so good to play really at A-League level, because you're playing with all the Sydney FC players. But then like the next week, half of them were away on Matilda's duty, so you're like, oh, now I'm playing with reserve grade. So
Yep.
yeah, it was quite like turbulent. So there was definitely like really enjoyable games in there, but then games that were a little bit more frustrating. And then I guess the change there was just the fact that a lot of those players the next season weren't going to be coming back because of the way that they changed the system. And also, I guess I was at that point in my life where I was like, look, I'm at an age where I'm like, work is becoming more of a priority. Sydney Olympics home ground and training facilities aren't where I live. And I was like, I kind of just have to make a call. And so the combination of those things just meant that I was like, I wanted a club that was closer to home.
Yep.
And at that point, Northern Tigers had been contacting me for like 4 years in a row, being like, come to the club. So I was like, okay, let's give it a go. Because I think it'll work best for what I just need in that moment. So I went there. That was, again, another great experience. I'd been there before, so I knew like the club culture was going to be great. And so I wasn't really worried about that. I think the thing that I wasn't expecting at Tigers is that I found that season quite frustrating. I guess on a personal level, like, and a team level, we actually performed pretty well. Like it was the season I'd scored the most goals in. Like we finished 5th out of like, I think, is it 12 or 14 teams? So only just missed out on finals. So technically not that bad.
Yeah.
But I just found myself not enjoying being on the pitch as much. Like I was getting frustrated, just maybe not on the same wavelength as the way that they played. I'm not sure what it was, but I just wasn't enjoying it. And I was like, okay, well, like if I'm not enjoying it, it's probably a good indication that I need to find somewhere where I could like get that passion back. So I decided to go to Gladesville Ravens because I knew some of the players there. Again, the coach had, or the technical director had contacted me 2 years in a row. So I was like, okay, like obviously they're keen. They looked like a really good club. They had good players. So I was like, let's just give it a go. And touchwood, so far, it's been really great. Like, again, really great culture. The team's playing really well. We've just been hit with a few injuries, which isn't ideal, but like so far the season's going pretty good, even though I haven't been able to participate too much because I've been injured. So, but I'm getting back into it. So hopefully I can get a bit of a flow on.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. It's like you're trying to find the right job.
Yeah,
But yeah, but you're
literally it
playing soccer.
is.
Yeah, it's
And I
so
feel
good.
like, yeah, it is like a job really. And when you get comfortable in your role, I guess it doesn't push you, it doesn't challenge you, and therefore you don't enjoy it as much. So it's like, well,
Yeah.
time for a change a little bit. So it's pretty much the same thing as that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, well, maybe tell us a bit about your sort of call up to the A League and what that was like, and the feelings associated, and the experience.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. I kind of got the gig myself. I managed to source Ante Juric's number through a friend of a friend of a friend. Just messaged me like, hey, like, can I come for a trial? And he was like, sure. So I went there, I trialed, and it was at the time where, like, you know, Caitlin Ford, Alana Kennedy, Chloe Lagazo, those kind of players were in the team. And he said, look, like, you're a great player, but we don't have a position for you in the squad at the moment. So happy to offer you as like a train on and see what happens like next year. And so I did that. And that was obviously an amazing experience playing with that level, and those girls, which was, and there was girls like Audrey Bledsoe and Sophia Huerta who now play for the US national team. So it was so good to be playing at that level, and I feel like I really improved as a player and developed my skills because I was being pushed like in every training. So I really enjoyed that. And then I went back the next season, and there was an injury that happened like right at the start of the season. So I got signed as like an injury replacement. It was just short term. So I wasn't there for the whole, I mean, I was there for the whole season, but I didn't play the whole season.
Right.
But I was eligible for a part of that season. It was as a defender, which obviously isn't my ideal position, but you take what you get, right? And again, that was so good to be able to, get some minutes on the pitch and just have that experience of playing at that level.
Yeah.
Obviously it would have been ideal to be able to play in my position because I feel like I have so much more to offer rather than defend. Attacking is my kind of thing. But it wasn't meant to be. So I continued training there for a couple more seasons, and then I was like, look, it's a big commitment for me to keep coming back and not to have like a permanent contract with the team. And Ante kind of expressed to me, he was like, honestly, if you go to another team, get experience, like I'll be able to sign you as a permanent player. He's just like, you just don't have that experience in the W League. And he's like, when we're winning titles every year, I can't offer that to you, which I understand. Like, it's hard to break into the top team in the top league in Australia, right? Like, it's not going to be an easy process. So I did try with other clubs, but to be quite honest with you, it's very political. There was so many times where they were like, oh, sure, come for a trial. And then I rock up to the trial, and I find out through the girls, because I know all the girls, they all play in MPL anyway. And they're like, oh,
Yeah.
no, there's no spots. All the players have been signed. Like,
Yeah.
I think the coaches don't think players are going to find out. I'm like, we all know each other. Like, of course we're going to find out. So
Yeah.
I think that really I had probably like 2 experiences like that where there was either no spots available, or players were rocking up to trials, not actually trialing because they were injured, but were getting in anyway. And, players are
Yeah.
saying to me, like, I'm sorry, I'm taking your spot. I think you deserve to be here. So I was like, at that point, I was like, I don't want to, like, for my own mental well-being, I was like, I'm not going to keep coming back and doing this when clearly there's a bit of a trend here. So I just decided to focus on MPL, and if something were to happen, then so be it.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because obviously not at the same level as you, but when I was playing basketball in New South Wales State League, basically
Yeah.
they texted everyone who was going to be in the team before the trials, and were like, look, the
Mm-hmm.
trials are on this day, but really the whole team had been selected prior, and they were
Yeah.
basically just like looking for some diamond in the rough or some extraordinary person.
Yeah. Yeah.
But everyone's sort of showing up on one premise, and you're standing there like,
Yeah.
yeah, well, like we already know who's in the team.
We
Like,
don't know
so
what the
that
situation is.
that sort of
Yeah.
politicization of sport
It
it's a
is
whole other
everywhere.
issue in Australia, you
Yeah,
know, like how it affects the
absolutely.
Wallabies, and like it
Hmm.
really, you know, limits talent and doesn't give everyone the right opportunities, I think, which
Yeah,
sounds like what
definitely.
you've
Well,
experienced.
it's a shame because there's like I'm definitely not the only one, and I'm sure similar in your situation. Like there are so many players in NPL that should be playing W League or A League, that just haven't been picked up for whatever reason. And quite frankly, I think there are players in W League who are only there because they know someone or they've come through the system, and it's like. I think there's space for that. Don't get me wrong. Like I think you do need to promote that development and coming through the system, but I think there's a limit to that. And I think they kind of just overcook it a little bit. And I mean, at this point, like it's funny, you kind of listen to the commentators sometimes and they're like, oh, this person's like 14 years old, they're the youngest player. And I'm like, I didn't realize it was like a record. Like, why is that something that should be promoted? It should just be
Yeah,
if they're
yeah,
good enough at 14, go right ahead, please, by all means. But if they're not
yeah.
ready, it shouldn't be a competition on who's the youngest and which team has the youngest player. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I always talk about it with my friends in relation to Australian rugby and how, you know, Wallabies have been in a um, like they just basically can't win at national level,
yeah,
and it's been pretty tough. Like having seen them be so successful in the past and stuff,
yeah,
but we, you know, when we were coming up through school, and a lot of the kids were getting picked out of these, you know, GPS schools like early
yeah,
on. You could see that happening right from year six,
yeah,
year seven, year eight. This kid is this person's son. This kid knows this
yeah,
person, whatever. And then you're like, you're not taking the talent that's there, and you're getting to the higher levels where these kids,
yeah.
they're just like don't actually have the talent. They've just always been bolstered,
They've come through the
you
system.
know,
Yeah,
by their
100%.
contacts. Yeah, and then the end
Yeah.
result is the Wallabies go from being amazing to like not that good. It might be a
Yeah.
bit oversimplified, but I think that's a
No,
key part of
I
the
get
problem.
what you're saying. Exactly. And honestly, like my story is not the only one. Like I've had a whole bunch of stuff that have happened since I was in school, which definitely has hindered my ability to come through the system and get into the A leagues. But like the thing is, I'm not the only one, and like there is so much talent that's just being missed out on, which is a shame. Like at a national level, it's a shame. And I'm sure everyone wants to see the best quality out there. So, and you know, football isn't the only sport as well. So hopefully that'll change. But I guess time will
Yeah.
tell, right?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Well, yeah, mate, just another quick one. What do you feel is the sort of key difference between, you know, the club level that you play at normally compared to what you experienced in A League? Was there like a big difference? Was there a sharp learning curve, or was it more, you know, physicality? Like, what sort of did you notice in that?
I would say the speed of play was definitely a lot quicker. Um, I would say that's the main one. Obviously, the extent to which strength and conditioning is incorporated into training as well is a big thing. Again, I'm comparing, you know, my time in NPL to Sydney FC. I think even if you compare between A League clubs, there's a massive difference.
Right.
Not just in terms of like the quality of facilities, but the type of programming, the type of training, the length of training, how often. And I think actually it's interesting. It's actually a fine balance. I know, for example, Wanderers were training, I think, every single day this one season. I wasn't with the team at that point, but you know, you compare to Sydney FC, who will train, let's say, 4 days a week plus their game. And obviously, you know, Wanderers typically, until the season, lower down the table compared to Sydney FC, who are regularly at the top. It just kind of shows that a balance is extremely important. It's not all about just go, go, go and play, 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 because a lot of players get burnt out. A lot of players get injured, and it is about finding the balance. And I think, you know, Sydney FC do a really good job of that. Like it's a good strength and conditioning program. The training standard was the best that I've experienced to date, really. And like I said, I learned a lot and developed as a player there for sure. And it's really about the speed and the technical ability at that speed. That's really the difference between NPL and W League.
Yeah, cool. And did you feel like you had to make big adjustments? Like, how did you feel comfortable straight away, or did it take you a while to feel comfortable? What was that experience like?
I think, well, when I first went in, it was kind of like a trial. So I was like, go, go, go. And I felt actually quite comfortable at that level. It did feel quick, but I felt like I adjusted quite quickly to it. I would definitely say, though, there are moments where confidence impacted that. The fact that you're there as a train on compared to players who are signed permanently, whether or not you're better than them or not, it doesn't matter. It definitely plays a dynamic in terms of how people treat you. By no means was anyone, rude or disrespectful to me, but I would say there was probably a small handful of girls that treated me as like an actual player in the team, as opposed to a sign on. Again, there was no one who was ever rude or disrespectful. It was just, it's different and you can feel it. And I think sometimes there were moments where, like, if I would make a small mistake, I'd get in my head a little bit because someone would say something, not having a go. It's just the standard. Everyone wants the standard to be high. And I think I would kind of sometimes get in my head and be like, oh no, should I be here? Am I good enough? So I did have to constantly kind of remind myself. I'm like, well, no, if Ante didn't want me here, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
He's not going to have a train on that's not good enough, or he's bringing down the team. So sometimes that would affect my training, but I just had to kind of remind myself, and then I'd kind of get back into it and really feel like I was at that level and capable of being in A-League.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the candor. No, it's really I think once you're sort of beyond the physical limits, it is, confidence is such a key part in these sports, like confidence and then tactics, obviously.
Yeah, definitely.
But do you have any sort of confidence management rituals, or is there anything you sort of do when feeling a bit low, or when you're
Yeah, it's a good
not to get
question.
too on the other end as well? You can get a bit arrogant sometimes and sort of go beyond.
Yeah, it's true. I think, look, to be honest, I'm quite naturally a confident person. Like, I think it's just a characteristic I have, but there are obviously times, and there are always times, even confident people get this, where you don't feel confident. I think for me, like, if I start not feeling confident and it shows in my game, like I start making small mistakes, or I try and like hide on the pitch sometimes, I think I just remind myself to go back to basics and get those right, because even just completing a pass, like, it helps your confidence so much, because you're like, okay, great, touch in the game or touch in training, like, did well. And then, like, you slowly build that up until you do that consistently. And then I find that just helps my confidence get back up. And then I'll start doing things more naturally. And I'm like, not so much focused on the little things, but I'm like, it just flows. And then that's kind of when my confidence comes back up. But I guess then on the other side of that, there are definitely been times where, like, I get overconfident. I wouldn't say overconfident. It's more so that complacency kind of
Yeah,
slips into the scenario, and I'm like, oh, I'm playing well at the moment. Like, I can not kick back, but it's like, oh, the goals will come, or like, I'll just play well today because I'm in form. But I think it's so easy to, if you then have that mindset, to then make the little mistakes, and then you keep making those little mistakes, then you get in your head, and then the confidence goes. So it's just always good to kind of stay on top of it, like, whether you're in form, or whether you're on a purple patch, whatever it is. I think you always just kind of got to go into a game or training, like, do the simple things right, and then you can keep going with your confidence and all that, and that'll come out a bit more naturally.
yeah. No, it's really interesting because I'm sort of thinking about it through the basketball lens, and like if
Mm,
you're shooting is like all confidence, and if you can't, like, if I don't know, I'm not hitting shots or someone's not hitting shots, it's
yeah,
always good to just go shoot some free throws, like back to basics, get
yeah,
your sort of rhythm and your form and your alignment together. And I feel like focusing on that specific, it like takes your mind off that sort of really broad way of thinking, which can bring apprehension and sort of lower your confidence. So it's really
yeah,
interesting
definitely.
parallel. So I see you're wearing your Armenia jersey. Maybe you could tell us a bit about this experience. So you're born in Australia. You lived there your whole life, and then you've gone to the highest level in your sport. Playing for Armenia. And yeah, maybe just if you could tell us a bit about, how that sort of came about. And then I'd be really interested to know, the feelings associated with going to Armenia, going to the training camps, playing in the games. Like it must have been really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so much, so much to talk about here.
Yeah.
I guess, like, going back to the start, it was actually really funny. I got a message on Instagram from a lady from the federation at the time who contacted me, being like, "Hey, I saw you playing for Sydney FC. You look like you have an Armenian last name. Usually IANYN gives it away. I just want to confirm, are you Armenian?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Oh, do you want to come and trial for the national team?" And I was like, "Yes." So what actually happened, I ended up finding the backstory to this afterwards. There was someone at a Sydney FC game where I came on and I played, and they obviously saw my name, and they told this lady from the federation about me, saying that there's an Armenian girl playing in the highest level in Australia, like maybe contact her. And so that's how it ended up happening. So it did happen just before COVID, so I didn't end up going straight away. And they were asking, like, I don't know what the situation was in Armenia, but obviously COVID wasn't a thing, because they were like, "No, just come, like it's fine." And I'm like, "Well,
Yeah.
no, we're in lockdown here, so not going to happen." So it's a little bit funny trying to explain, I guess, to the people in Armenia, being like, "Well, yeah, no, we actually can't leave here, and if we leave, it's really hard to get back in." So I think I actually had to put it off for 2 years before I can actually go and do the
Yeah.
trial and play for the team, which is what I've been
I
doing.
actually remember I had to come here as well at that time for some other initiative, and returned
Yeah.
one-way tickets from Armenia to Sydney were about 12 grand because
Oh my God.
there was no flights going. Yeah, so it's
Wow.
completely
Okay, well,
understandable.
plus that as well, I'm sure the
Yeah,
federation
yeah,
wouldn't have been too happy having to pay that. So,
yeah, yeah. It was
um,
pretty crazy.
yeah. Wow. I guess in terms of like my experience and playing and coming to Armenia. So I guess a bit of context, my family and myself as well had never been to Armenia before coming and playing for the national team. So it was a very big moment, particularly for my dad, because he actually wasn't born in Armenia. He was born in Jordan, and then moved to Australia because of the war at like the age of 7. So he'd never been able to go back to Armenia, or hadn't had the chance. So my mum and dad actually came with me, because it was, I guess, like a family experience as much as it was a football one.
Yep.
We were on different flights though, so I know, even for me, like I'm not an emotional person at all. Like I don't really cry. But I remember when I was like flying in to Yerevan, I just weirdly got emotional, and I can't even to this day, I still can't explain it. I was just like heart was pumping. I was like, "What's going on?" A little bit of a tear, and I was like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, why do I feel like this?" But it was it was a nice feeling. And I think like a similar experience when I like played my first game, and like also learnt the national anthem and sang the national anthem. Like I just got weirdly emotional. I was like, "This is so strange." Like, so like I said, to this day still can't explain or put a word on what that was, but it was a very nice feeling, and I guess I feel so much more connected to Armenia than what I did before, because really, like you said, I was born in Australia. Like my only exposure to Armenia is through my dad's side of the family, and Armenians that I know, which to be fair is actually not a lot, because we don't do a lot of like the Armenian events in Australia. So it was very limited. So it was really nice to actually go and see Armenia, and then like feel so much more connected. And it's really funny, like now when like me or my family do certain things, like, and then you see like things happen in Armenia, and you're like, "Oh, yep, okay, that's the Armenian side coming out." Like you put two and two together so much more than before, where I was just like, "Oh, that's just our family." You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I think that's first of all, that experience you're describing. I think a lot of people go through it and sort of can't explain either. I remember when
Yeah.
I brought one of my friends to Armenia for the first time, and he saw Mount Ararat from the genocide
Yeah.
monument, and he just started crying. And like I was like,
Yeah.
"Dude, what's going on? Like we're in the middle of summer. Like having such a good
Yeah, like,
time. Like is everything okay?"
literally.
And it's just this this emotional sort of experience, and I think a lot of people
Yeah.
get it as well when they leave. I don't
Yeah.
know what your experience is like when you're just like, okay, now sort of have to go back. um, but no, that's really interesting. So basically, what did you sort of do after that when you landed in Yerevan?
So I guess like the first time that we get a driver that take us straight to the camp. We spend, the whole time there at the camp training every day. Then obviously we have the games. So whether it's official games or just friendlies, we usually have two for each camp that we go. Usually one's home and away. If it's a friendly, it's either both home or both away, just for the convenience. And yeah, it's a really good experience. It's very professional in terms of, how everything's set up, how it's run. Like obviously it's, if it's the official games, it's run by like UEFA or whoever is kind of managing the tournament that we're in. And it's, it's very professional, very legit. And that's a really nice experience because I guess you don't really get that at NPL here. It's very much just like you rock up to your game, you play, super excited, you go home. Whereas there's a lot more involved in it. A simple thing is like getting like transported to the game, having a lanyard when you get off the bus, like very small things, but it's all part of that experience, which makes it really exciting. I guess the least fun part of the experience is definitely the travel time. Like being able to cope with that is really important in terms of how you perform, because I'm not sure. I'm not sure if this is just like an Armenian thing or a European thing, but all our flights seem to be at like 1, 2, 3 a.m. Like I've been to Armenia at the airport at 11 a.m. and there's no one there, but you go at 11 p.m. at night and everyone's there, and I'm like, why?
Yeah, no, that's just
Yeah,
yeah. No, that's it. I think Yerevan basically is at the bottom of the flights list, and like, yeah,
clearly.
I'm constantly at Zvartnots at the weirdest hours, picking up people or
I
dropping people off.
know.
It's pretty
So
wild, yeah.
not fun, but that means it's like it's not great for recovery, right? Because you're catching a flight. Like you have to get up at 1 for a 4 a.m. flight. You know, you don't get direct flights, or if you do, they're on the wrong days that we can't travel on. So you go to these places. I remember once we had a 17-hour layover in Vienna, which was so much fun, the airport.
Yeah,
And then you go to your next destination, you get there. Sometimes you land on the day you have to do the pre-game training on the same day. Then you obviously have like 12 hours sleep because you just wrecked. And then the next day's game. And then when you finish the game, the next morning you're up at 2 to get back to Armenia or your next destination. So like the travel time is just crazy for the away games. And obviously that's part of the experience as well, and being able to handle that and make sure that you're ready to perform at your best as much as you can.
yeah. And how did you find the level of play, like compared to what you were used to back in Australia?
I'm going to be 100% honest, it's probably not as good, just to be quite frank. Australia is very physical and fast. Obviously it's reflected in our national team, right? Like it's in the top 12 in the world, I think we're ranked. So you can see that comes from quite a young age in the system in Australia. In saying that, in Armenia, the girls are very technical. So like the skill level, everyone is very, very skillful, very technical, which I think is actually missing in Australia. So it's definitely different. But I think the major thing that's missing and really, I think, stopping Armenia from going even further, particularly in the women's, is the lack of strength and conditioning and the lack of fitness.
Right.
Like, I think for me, I probably like I'm one of the stronger girls on the team, and I'm quite a small person. Like I have little chopstick arms. Like I'm not like if you're comparing me to other people in Australia, like I'm not a big player. But I'd say I'm probably one of the stronger girls in the team who can push people off the ball. So I think what would take us to the next level is really having that strength and conditioning program and a fitness program. And to be honest, a lot of our results show that. Like we, for example, were like the last game against Romania, who's ranked 45, and we're 145. Like huge difference. It was 0-0 till 60 minutes. Like we were
Right.
completely in that game. We had chances, but the game ends up 5-0 because we're a 60-minute team and Romania are obviously a 90-minute team. So I think if we can really build up the strength and the fitness of our team, we can become a 90-minute team. That game may end up 0-0, 1-0. Either way, we're far more competitive, and I think we go a long way because the skill's not the issue. The skill is there, and the vision and the ability to make great passes and movements, it's all there, but the fitness and the strength to actually do it, I think, is the bit that's missing and stopping us from getting to the next level.
Yeah. I think that sort of can't be overstated. Like sport in general. It's a physical contest, and fitness and strength, speed, agility. That's sort of what I think is what's on display. Beyond the skill. And I always sort of try to tell the kids that I'm coaching, like, you'd rather have a really fit person who can play, a full 4 quarters or a full 90-minute football game, who's less skilled, than someone who's like super skilled but can only gets gassed after about 10, 20 minutes or something like that. So I think that's
100%.
really interesting. What do you think, like, maybe there's no certain answer here, but like, what do you suspect is the difference between, Sydney can be a pretty intense place, and I know it's quite competitive, and people, a lot of people want to make it to these positions that there's not much availability. What do you think sort of drives the difference? Your best guess?
I think it's mindset. Like, realistically, Australia was in the same position 2 decades ago. Like, there was no strength and conditioning program for women. Like, that wasn't, that people weren't doing it. And you can already see the way that the game has accelerated in, the higher ranked countries. People, it's so funny. There are so many guys that have, you hear them say, oh, women's football's not as good as men's. And I was like, well, have you watched it? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay, like, what? But then they watch it and they're like, oh crap, like, it actually is. Like, and you can see from where it's been, even let's say 4 years ago, like Champions League final, I think there's like 3,000 people at the game. It's on like a grass paddock next to a railway station. And now you've got hundreds and thousands of people going to these events because we've invested in the same level of resources and training that the men's are receiving. So now the women can grow and they're far more stronger, physical, and able to build up speed, and the game's quicker and enjoyable in that sense. So I think it is the mindset that women's football is just as good and just as competitive and can be just as quick and physical as the men's, but you have to give the same level of resources, funding, and commitment to it. Because if you're comparing just without doing any fitness, any training, a man to a woman, yes, a man is stronger than a woman, but if you add training to that, then you can build up that strength. And I think it's that mindset of being like, women are capable of lifting heavy weight. Like, it's not just a thing that a man can do. So I think that's really, for me, it's all about mindset and commitment to being open to changing mindset, which I think just hasn't quite been seen in Armenia yet. But obviously you can see it's happened in Australia. It's taken many years. It's not happened overnight. But you can see the ramifications of that and how Australian football has grown in that way.
No, I think the gender sort of lens on this is super interesting, especially in Armenia, because it can be, there's obviously good and bad people with this issue, but in Armenia I think it definitely is pretty far behind in terms of a general, like, just not even in such a negative sense, but like in a cultural sense, the difference between genders. So that definitely would play a big part. So that's quite interesting. I think the other side of it is we're sort of witnessing it now in the States with WNBA, with players like Caitlin Clark. So you've got these amazing players. There was like Mad Monday, the college basketball tournaments, and everyone's showing up. I think it was like 6 times more ticket sales for the women's final, and then compared to the men's, and then the women are going to the WNBA and getting paid like 60, 70 grand a year or something, really low. But I think it's these sort of players, like maybe Serena Williams for tennis, Caitlin Clark for women's basketball in Australia. They basically like put women's sport on the map, and it's like really dependent on these sort of iconic players sort of coming through and forcing the attention to be like, look, this is actually a really entertaining sport, like just as much as men. So I think what you're saying is right. It's about time. You just got to give the resources, and in time, the resources,
100%. Like, you put bums on seats, they will get the players will get paid more, right? Because that's where it's all coming from. But people won't put their bum on a seat if it's not entertaining. And it will be entertaining if you then commit resources to growing the development of the game. So it's a cycle, but you really have to commit to it. You can't do it half-assed, or else it's not going to work and you're going to end up with a poor investment. But if you do it properly, and you really commit to it, then it will be a good investment, and the outcomes will show. Which is it's happening slowly in the women's game. I mean, I would argue it's happened quite quickly over the past 3 years, but there is so much more to go. Like, you know, you compare simply just the wages of players, like, yeah, don't get me started on that. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But at least now it's actually like a viable career. Like, when I was playing football at a younger age, like yeah, I love football. I'd love to play professionally, but I was like, what kind of life am I going to have? Like, I'd need a part-time job. Like, you know, that's a lot of commitment for not a lot of great outcomes. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that at least it is now an option for younger girls to be like, I can become a professional footballer and live a pretty good life, and have income where I don't need to actually supplement with another job.
So Claudia, what sort of lessons would you give to a young girl who want to play football and you know, aspires to play at the highest level?
I think for me, the number one thing is, which I actually didn't have, which I really wish I did have, is really finding an idol and someone to look up to. So when I was younger, like, women's football wasn't really on TV. It really wasn't on TV at all. You couldn't actually see what you wanted to become, right? So I was quite often looking at like male players like a Messi, which is great, but in terms of making it a career, it's not. When I was young, it's not the same pathway, and it's not the same situation, right? So for me, if I was a younger girl now, I'd find that person, that player, female player, that I really like align with, someone that I want to be like, that I think that I have the skill set to be like, and really work really hard to get to where that is. And I think make the call kind of early and be like, if you want to commit to a career in football, like, commit to it. Because like I said, for me, it was very much like, oh, like, I'd love to commit, but like, it's not really enough. It's not really a career at that point. I think now it is. So make the call, and if the call is yes, I want to play professional football, like, go for it. Find that idol and just work really hard to master those skills. Do the extra time, the extra training, and you will get there. And I think probably as well, network would be the other thing. Make sure you know people. Don't be shy. I know quite often, and probably this might be an Armenian culture thing, like, oh, don't want to suck up to that person, like, who are they? But at the end of the day, like, got to be done. It's called networking. It's not sucking up. Like, and I think you do have to do it, because you just never know whose path crosses which way, and whoever can do you a favor, and take those favors. Because at the end of the day, like we've kind of discussed on it, there will always be politics in sport. There's just no way of getting rid of it. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And that's okay. That's life. Shit doesn't always go your way, right? But if you can make that work for you, I think go for it. But don't let that supplement or take over the need and the necessity of working hard, because connections will only get you so far. It is a balance of making sure you know the right people and that you're actually really good at what you do. So I guess that would be my advice.
Yeah, no, I think that's really wise, and really good advice. No, awesome. Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today. It was really nice conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been really great.